Beautiful, isn't it? Our green and pleasant land. But postcard views conceal a darker picture, a hidden crisis in our countryside.
Steady, steady, steady.
Farming families struggling on low incomes.
I am a farmer that's considered using a food bank, and how ridiculous is that?
Deprived communities with poor access to the services many of us take for granted.
You're surrounded by the most beautiful countryside imaginable, and yet we're this little council estate in the middle of nowhere.
And a housing market that prices people out of the villages where they were born and raised.
But there's another house for sale here. It's probably going to be going for about 375 to 400,000, which is obviously not something that a local would be able to afford, especially someone like me.
These are problems only too familiar in our towns and cities, but they're often overlooked or even unseen in rural Britain. The issues in this film affect millions. This is a story of just 3 people living in north-east Derbyshire. This is Gamesley Housing Estate near Glossop, home to Kelly and her family.
Come on then, Pudding, let's go. It's originally a Manchester overspill estate, and it's right on the edge of the Peak District National Park.
The beauty of the Peak District attracts thousands of visitors every year, but they don't go to Gamesley. What would they see if they did?
Poverty, lack of employment. The infrastructure around here is terrible to get out of the area. It's forgotten about within Derbyshire. We've just lost lots and lots of services. Those important services that help families as well. The pub's gone in the middle of the estate. It's just a massive eyesore and a waste of a building.
There's not much to do on Gamesley, and Kelly finds it difficult to get off the estate too.
Hello, can I have a taxi for now, please? Yeah, Bonsall. I'm off to work now, so I need to ring a taxi because there's no bus that meets up with the time I need to get to work. The buses around here are terrible. The trains around here aren't much better. There's no buses in the evening, so if you're employed, say, till 8 o'clock at night, you can't get back in to Gamesley. You can't even get to a hospital appointment. Elderly people can't get off the estate. People with young, small children can't get off the estate. On a Sunday, you do feel a bit like you're in a desert island.
Deeper into the national park, to a hill farm in Edale, where tenant farmer James lives and works.
3 generations of the family have been farming here since my granddad took the tenancy on in 1971. It's 343-acre hill farm, roughly 400 ewes, and then I run a flock of 80 pedigree North Country Cheviot ewes, obviously the prettiest sheep in the world. I want to do everything I possibly can to give them the best life. There's an important part of my life as my wife and children are on a par. not one's better than the other. And my wife knows that as well. Look, back test. People that think farmers are rich, completely wrong. There are some rich farmers. We don't own this farm, we're tenant farmers. It's probably worth about £2.5 million, this farm, but it's not worth £2.5 million to us, it's worth £2.5 million to our landlord. I think if me and my wife packed in today, sold everything we own sheep-wise, we might put about £25,000 in the bank, and that was it. Now, we've probably got about £15,000 worth of debts. We're always just fighting to survive, really, all the time. It's a battle. Let's get to the end of this year, let's get to the end of next year.
Yulegrave in the Derbyshire Dales, a desirable village where the average house costs more than £300,000, completely out of reach for most local people here, including Cassie and her husband Lee. They're taking their 18-year-old daughter Jordan back to where they lived when she was a baby.
This is where he used to stay.
A family of 3 lived in this box room in Cassie's parents' house for 2 years.
Your Moses basket were over there. And we had a double bed that went across this end of the bedroom. We had to live here because we was waiting on a council list, and we ended up coming back and living with my mum and dad.
I'd been in the RAF and I've come back out and kind of got one of the first jobs I could, and it didn't really pay much. So this is why we ended up at my in-laws.
which put a lot of pressure because obviously my mum and dad are only next door. My sister and her other half was just a few doors away. Lack of space, all of us being tired, and we did have quite a few fallouts. My mum actually ended up sending a letter saying that she couldn't cope anymore and that she had no choice but to ask us to leave, basically making us homeless. She didn't want to do it, but we couldn't carry, 2 years, we couldn't carry on the way we were carrying on.
Homelessness in rural areas is on the increase. Many families have no idea where they'll be housed. Cassie was moved into a council house several miles away and felt cut off from friends and family.
It's probably not that far, but when you can't actually drive, 4 minutes for a car, not that far. Public transport is a totally different matter. And miles to walk back down to the actual main road for any bus service or anything like that. So I was very much on my own. I got postnatal depression. It was very hard down here, very hard, to the point that me and Lee nearly broke up over it. Lovely view now, but when you're looking at it every day and that's the only thing that you're seeing, make you quite depressed actually, make you feel like you're a prisoner really.
The countryside can be an isolating place, especially when you rely on public transport like Kelly does. She gets the bus home from work every day.
I'm a cook in a local children's home. I do 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, fits in with the school hours. I've just passed my driving test finally at 33. Managed to save enough money to do it, but now I've got to save enough money to buy a car. So for now, we're stuck getting the bus. Thank you. It costs about £8 a day, which is an hour of my wages.
The bus doesn't take Kelly all the way home. She walks up the hill to Gamesley along a scruffy, deserted path, which crosses the famous Trans-Pennine Trail.
It's used by horses, bike riders, ramblers.
Not that Gamesley benefits from the tourist trade.
They just pass through. They're not going to stop here. They're going to keep walking and go somewhere nicer. And yet there's a beautiful cafe just 5 minutes around the corner. Come here. You all right, Flower? Do you reckon your brother's had a good day at school? Yeah. The sunshine and green leaves makes the countryside look pretty, but it's not always like that.
James farms in one of the prettiest places in England, but making a living from hill farming is tough.
Such a volatile industry. You get paid what your stock's worth on the day you take it to be sold, and it's a lottery. At times it's got as bad as where we have considered the food bank option because the income at times has been so low. I'm a farmer that's considered using a food bank, and how ridiculous is that somebody who produces food can get to a position where they can't necessarily afford the food that they've produced in the supermarket. Come on! Come on, boys! Come on! I'm the same as everybody else. I buy chicken at £3. There is a cheap food culture, and I'm a victim of it, but I'm also a perpetrator of it. I almost unfeather my own nest. I will buy cheap food because that's what we can afford to buy. Yet I know that it should be more expensive, but I'm not in a position to pay for it because I don't get paid for it in the first place, and it's a stupid, vicious circle.
A vicious circle that takes its toll on far more than just the farm's profit.
I don't deal with stress very well at all. I've suffered with depression, anxiety, things like that, on a more regular basis than is healthy for somebody, really. Over the years, I've done all sorts of ridiculous things to justify feeling depressed. I'd organised the English National Cheviot Championship at Hope, and I felt that embarrassed about the way I was and the way I felt. I didn't turn up, didn't take my sheep. I burnt all the rosettes that had accumulated that year.
There are rising levels of depression and mental illness among people working in agriculture. More than one farmer a week in the UK dies by suicide, and there are fewer services in rural areas to help them.
I've got to get on with it. I've got to get out of bed every day and do what I do because the animals on this farm depend on me to stay alive. Cassie's
mental health suffered as a result of her 18-year housing struggle. constantly moving between temporary accommodation, trying to get back to her village. Until finally, something changed that would allow Cassie and her family to come home. Affordable houses were built in Yulgrave.
As soon as we found out about them, we applied for them. And we would never have been able to get back to the village if it wasn't for them. It's part rent, part buy. It was on the market for 170,000 and we've actually bought half of it, so it's like a mortgage for 75,000, which made it more affordable for us as a family compared to houses on the high street, which are going for like 375 to 400,000.
No one having that one.
I'm actually a student nurse now. My children are growing up. I do feel like we're actually living a family life now. And it's taken me a fair few years to get here. So just... Sorry. I never really thought about it before. Now it's all just... My daughter just turned 2 when we first moved out of the village. She's now coming up to 18 years old. And I spent that entire time basically trying to get back. I'm 40 years old and I'm finally walking into a house that is actually somewhere I want to be and can call home.
You can choose one.
Does it matter?
A countryside where local people can afford to live. A countryside with good public services serving every community. A fair food system that supports farming families. Is this too much to ask from our countryside in the future? In rural communities across the country, people feel ignored and disconnected from policy decisions being made in Westminster. It's time we heard what they have to say. It's time to listen.
It is a beautiful place, but we do suffer with many problems. It would be fantastic if our voices were heard just as much as those people within the cities as well.